I use this as the example because for The Atlantic, Rowland Manthrop actually was at the end of 2013 doing his review of the best books of 2013, and he wrote this: "When the best books of 2013 are listed, the most important may not make the cut. That's because the most exciting literary innovation of the year is not a book at all, but a video game for iPad and iPhone." Considering this, I have some other snippets of his review here. He says, "Gaming isn't about to go all literary just yet. Fighting and running to the next fight remain gamers' favorite forms of activity, and as long as that's the case, literary games will be a niche interest. The true legacy of games, such as Device 6, is more likely to be in book publishing. For an industry in a state of flux, these apps mark a path to follow. They might even change the way people read altogether." He goes on to give some examples of that. He says, "As gamers and readers come together and devices offer new possibilities for interactive text, books may come to resemble games. Eventually, reading a novel could be like playing something like Device 6. Imagine Philip Glass writing a creepy as hell score for the new Stephen King, with music that comes in just at the right moment. Such a thing could be done right now because when a reader is reading on a smartphone, or an iPad in this case, it is possible to know exactly where they are in a text. Or imagine a novel that takes over your phone and starts sending you text messages. Once writers and publishers start to engage seriously with tablet technology, the possibilities are vast. But if we allow our minds to consider it, why not? A lot of us read on e-devices now. And as we turn a page, that e-device knows exactly where we are. So why not cue the soundtrack, right? Why not send us a creepy text, right? The possibilities exist. And Rowland Manthrop used Device 6 as an opportunity to sort of begin this conversation. And again, is this a book? Is it a game? Or is it something brand new that really begins to challenge some of these definitions? The point that I want to make about this and about these new innovations and whether they go anywhere or not is that it fundamentally alters the experience for many people of what it means to read. And it's really hard, from my perspective, to overestimate the impact of these things. Books with music and graphics and interactive elements, you couple that with video games, right? And where'd Kara go? Yeah, there you are. And Kara's doing work right now on sort of video games in the language arts education and things like that. It creates new forms of narrative, right? And new levels of interactivity. When you have choice-based, recursive, nonlinear, alternate narratives, or to use a phrase that I actually learned from Dr. Kirchhoff's talk last semester, ergodic, right? An ergodic relationship to literature, which is interacting in a non-trivial way, right? That's how you defined it, right? Choose your own adventure on crack, if you will. When you engage with the story, you shape the story, you change the story, it fundamentally changes the definition and the feeling of reading. No longer a one-way experience. Right? I used to have passive on here, and then I got into big conversations. Is reading really passive because you're engaging with it? But it is very one-way. Here's the text. It comes to you. You think it through, right? Engage with it. You don't change the text back. But these new forms allow that to happen. And when I say it's hard to overestimate the impact of this, it's because these kinds of texts train a new generation of readers and of future writers, which is significant, in what to expect from storytelling and literature. Even some of the younger people in this room, right? Your idea of a book might look very traditional, but the 6-year-old who's reading Treasure Island the first time in something that looks like that is going to come to expect something very different from the reading experience. And it's something that we need to consider, again, as readers, as writers, as teachers, right? Future publishers. How does it change things? Of course, when we talk about the sort of digital frontier and the new media revolution, it's not just the new things of form, right? It's something that has fundamentally changed the way that we live our lives as well. So it becomes the subject of writers, too. It marks a shift in how we live and learn and relate and how we define ourselves and our culture. It's one of my favorite graphics in the whole piece. Has anybody ever seen this before? this Facebook graphic. This was a graphic that was created by Facebook on the august day of their 5th anniversary back in 2010. But they wanted a new way to show the impact of Facebook. And so they asked a number cruncher to sort of make it visual. There's no actual borders on this map of the world. What this is a number cruncher at Facebook got together and picked 10 million sets of friends on Facebook. And he made each person a dot of light, and he connected them to the person they were friends with. And with 10 million such friendships, what emerges is literally a world shaped by social media. And I just choose this as a representative of that fundamental fact that I think we all know, even if we don't stop to consider it or aren't willing to admit it, right? That we now live in a world that is fundamentally changed by this new technology, in the ways that we live our lives and the ways that we define ourselves. And thus, writers, both traditional and non-traditional, have started to make this a part of their themes, a part of their subject matter. So you start with something as cynical as Sherman Alexie's Facebook sonnet that was published in the New Yorker in May 2011. Some of you have seen this before, I know, because I've showed it to you in class. Welcome to the endless high school reunion. Welcome to past friends and lovers, however kind or cruel. Let's undervalue and amend the present. Why can't we pretend every stage of life is the same? Let's exhume, resume, and extend childhood. Let's all play the games that occupy the young. Let fame and shame intertwine. Let one's search for God become public domain. Let church.com become our church. Let's sign up, sign in, and confess here at the altar of loneliness. Sherman Alexie is famously not a big fan of new media. For a long time, he refused to have his books published in e-format, but he's since relented on that. But again, Sherman Alexie, who many of us know is a very prominent Native American author, sort of beginning to offer commentary on this new world. And fiction writers as well have gotten into the game in many, many different ways. I choose Richard Powers as a quick example of this. His story Modulation, picked as one of the best American short stories of 2009. I pick him because many people may know Richard Powers is also a faculty member at U of I, just down the road. He's somebody whose fiction has been celebrated. He was a Pulitzer Prize finalist. I think he won the National Book Award for The Echo Maker. He's also a MacArthur genius, as many of the writers I've mentioned are. But this story is one, and it's an early example from 2009, where Powers, who in a lot of his works, he's a trained musician as well, sort of works with the intersections of music and literature, writes a story about the digital music revolution called Modulation. And just a quick rundown. So the story is how digital music affects a multitude of characters, from a retiring ethnomusicologist, a man at the end of his career who's made a life of studying music, to soldiers in Iraq listening to their iPods getting ready for combat, to one character who is a future pop musician. So he goes to competitions around the world and remixes 8-bit video game songs on the spot. And who does the best job wins the competition. And it takes us the plot of that. And again, Powers is a very hybrid writer himself. This notion of a computer virus that infects everybody's music device and blanks them, bricks them, and replaces all of the digital music with the divine chord. Right? Those of you from a musical background. And it's this kind of post-apocalyptic kind of story. But again, this commentary on a world in which music, which is something Richard Powers cares a lot about, has been reduced to a technology, has been reduced to a commodity. And how, again, the plot of this kind of conspiracy in here is to blank it all out and replace it once again with this divine chord, right? Where everybody hears the astral music again. So again, beginning to comment on that and using digital music, of all things, as a thematic trope. The writer, and we were talking about this beforehand, the writer who I feel best encapsulates this style of writing, both in form and content right now, is Jennifer Egan. And her novel, A Visit from the Goon Squad, which came out in 2010 and won the Pulitzer Prize in 2011. She has the distinction of actually holding the Pulitzer Prize for 2 years because in a rare occurrence, the Pulitzer Committee chose not to award one in 2012. This novel, sort of on a very basic level, it's largely traditional stories, and It itself is a hybrid. It's a collection of stories, but it's also marketed as a novel, so nobody really knows what to call it. I'll probably call it both as I talk about it. It sort of runs from the 1970s up through to a couple stories towards the end that take place in the not-so-distant future. So again, another kind of blurring there. But by and large, it has traditional kind of universal themes. It takes as a theme, sort of aging, the loss of innocence, the passing of time. And she kind of blends it, in this case, with the rock music industry to discuss the ways in which popular culture, music, media, technology, both makes us very aware of the fickleness of time and the passage of time, because what changes faster than our fads and our technology, right? But also, curiously, gives us the means by which to ignore that passage of time, to distract ourselves from it. She kind of plays with that trope, again, while exploring the title, The Goon Squad, is representative of time, right? And the way it shows up and kind of beats you over the head without you realizing it. And sort of explores this theme, and like I said, by and large, traditional stories. Perhaps the most famous story from this, and I'll illustrate this, is called Great Rock and Roll Pauses, and it fits very much with the rock music idea. And it's narrated by a 12-year-old girl, and the main characters are her mother, her father, and her brother, who suffers from a form of autism. And it's very Asperger's-like, although it's not named. And so, as part of his autism, he becomes very obsessed with those rock songs we all know, the kind that stop in the middle and wait a few seconds and then pick up. So you think they're done, but they're not really done. And he becomes obsessed with these, and he starts tracking the pauses, and he measures the length of the pause, and he comes, it's an obsession with him. But it also serves as a kind of metaphor within the story and within the larger work as a whole, because the notion of the rock pauses represents that desire to pause the flow of time and the sheer pleasure that comes from the suspension, but then the continuance. But also marked with that sort of bittersweet awareness that the next time it ends, that's it. Very complex, right? The story, the theme itself, the thing that makes this, by and large, the most famous story in A Visit from the Goon Squad is the whole thing is told in PowerPoint format. This is what it actually looks like in the book. She famously said in an interview that she tried to convince her publisher to print them in full color, but this wasn't the era financially to convince publishers of anything like that. Just to give you a sense of some of my favorite slides from this, and the ways in which it works, right? Ways it can be when Dad comes back. Kissing Mom, telling stories, laughing, wine cork popping. Sits in car before coming in, hugging Mom, silent, angry, gin pouring. How much story is evoked in that, right? This is just a PowerPoint image, but you see the teeter-totter, right? You see it, well, what's more common these days, right? You get a sense of her father, and we know from other stories, he's become a doctor, but he's always wanted to do something else. He's kind of a little bit disappointed with his lot in life, right? So, again, the tipping of this. Another slide. Mom spots the toy horse. I keep it on my windowsill. It's made of apricot shells. She and Dad got it when they lived in Pakistan. Mom told me once, we thought our baby might play with the horse. After Dad and Mom found each other again, she packed up her life in New York and met him overseas. I never looked back, she says. I still play with the horse sometimes alone in my room, even though I'm 12. I like to make the prediction come true. Now, I read it in that way, but you could obviously read it in any number of ways. We kind of, at this point in our existence, have a PowerPoint literacy, right? We kind of understand that, but it layers it, right? And there's a sense the text on there is very simple and yet still very evocative, and the PowerPoint format sort of augments that. She wasn't done with PowerPoint. She didn't stop with PowerPoint. Let's put it that way. Egan, this became a very popular novel, like I said, won the Pulitzer Prize, and she began to sort of push the envelope further. A year after she won the Pulitzer, she kind of continued her experimentation, and also continued the story of one of the characters from A Visit from the Goon Squad on Twitter. Jennifer Egan paired up with The New Yorker and Twitter, and so on the New Yorker's official Twitter feed, on May 25th, 2012, began to publish a story, and it occurred over a series of days, all in a series of tweets, and it's called Black Box. And it actually takes one of the characters from Visit from the Goon Squad and inserts her in an entirely different genre. It's kind of like a futuristic spy thriller. And the notion of this story is that the she in the story, the narrator, is called a beauty. And she's basically a spy who's dispatched to get close to a major criminal or terrorist that's never really established. She calls him her designated mate, to sort of, again, elicit inside information, to send it back. But this isn't just like a traditional story that then she just sort of copied and pasted 144 characters at a time. She wrote it specifically with the genre, if you want to call it that, of Twitter in mind. So the trope here is that each 144 character entry is a recording that the spy made on a subcutaneous chip, right? As sort of keeping track of her day and giving advice to the next beauty who comes along. So each tweet is ostensibly something she's recorded kind of on the sly each night. Now, I wouldn't argue that the themes of this particular piece are as complex or as nuanced as anything from A Visit from the Goon Squad, but it's no simple novelty either. I mean, she really thought through, well, if I'm going to tell a story through Twitter, how do I do that? And she invented a whole mode of doing that. It's because of this story, and later the New Yorker actually did publish it as a linear narrative in their issue in June, but it's because of this story that Twitter started the Twitter Fiction Festival and began inviting authors to see what they could do with the format, see what they could do with Twitter. This is a Pulitzer Prize winning author and sponsored again by the New Yorker. So again, very high culture, the New Yorker, entering into the realm of Twitter and just seeing what's possible. It sparks something new. Here comes another rocky transition. Right? And when she did this in 2012, because it was online on Twitter, people around the world saw it. Which brings me to global exchange and interchange. Right? A little arbitrary, but I had to do something. All right? So in a world of Twitter and new media, there are few borders. And those borders are crossed and blurred every day. And coupled with what I mentioned earlier, global commerce and immigration, we enter an era in which national definitions and national stories are constantly being rewritten, are constantly in flux. It fosters that kind of cross-pollination I mentioned earlier, and it obliterates notions of distance and traditional borders in ways on a cultural level. I would wager that for many of the students in this room, it was just as common for you to enjoy anime and manga as it was Archie and Jughead or the Flintstones, right? There are people maybe in the room, but certainly here at Millikin, who prefer Bollywood to Hollywood, right? Who wouldn't bat an eye if the latest video game or movie had a soundtrack that included a K-pop star from Korea. Right? That's the era that we live in, right? There's clearly this cross-pollination. Any of you who grew up with Pokemon, right? Kara also did a paper on that, right? But this idea of that's our American culture, but it's something that's created through this cross-cultural pollination, right? And it creates this dynamic, fertile intermarriage of cultures, languages, art forms. In the realm of the new American literature, this translates into increasingly diverse voices, perspectives, and even languages that, again, kind of challenge the notion of Americanness. For me, this manifests most clearly in what I like to call kind of new ethnic literature in America. Traditional ethnic American literature, by and large, focuses on stories of immigration and assimilation. Somebody comes from another country into the United States and struggles, sometimes succeeds, sometimes does it, to fit into a new culture, the kind of melting pot aspect. But this new ethnic literature that's a part of this kind of global interchange is far different. You tend to have authors who are born in other places, but both they and their characters and their narratives tend to move back and forth in ways. And the references in those texts are to global cultures, so whether that's food or language or folklore or music, film. It blends languages very often. And there's a lot more back and forth than there is in that traditional sort of one-way ethnic literature.